So up until now, we've established that storytelling continues to be a need even in today's rapidly evolving media landscape, where the influence of digital platforms has transformed how stories are told, consumed, and shared. So has this new media now shaped the narrative to make the world a better place? That's what we're going to be talking about in our next panel, where our speakers will tell us how they harness the power of digital media to amplify voices and shape public narratives. Join me in welcoming our panelists, Lakshmi Chaudhary, founder at Splainer Media, Rekha Bala, lead editor at Her Story and Social Story, Your Story's Gender and Social Impact Verticals. This conversation is going to be moderated by Nandita Lakshmanan, founder and CEO at the PR Actors. She was recognized among India's top 10 women in public relations by Reputation Today in 2016 and has served in prestigious juries for public relations excellence, including the 57th Cannes Lions International Advertising Festival. We have 3 mics? Okay.
So I like how you introduce the subject with a question mark, because that's pretty much our conversation. So has new media shaped narratives to make the world a better place? That's the topic of our discussion this afternoon. And this topic sits firmly at the intersection of culture, technology, and humanity, which is great to have a thinning crowd, but a crowd nonetheless, who are in the business of tech, and perhaps you walk away with a little bit of understanding on the role that you can play in the changing landscape of media. So as Lakshmi categorically stated when we spoke a week ago on the topic, there is no such thing as new media or old media. It is all internet media, which means that if information has to be discovered, it has to be online. And this has definitely changed how we learn, how we communicate, and most importantly, how we form and share our beliefs. There was a recent digital report by the Reuters Institute and the University of Oxford, which clearly stated that people are selectively avoiding news, and platforms like Meta are reducing the role of news on their platforms. So on one hand, these platforms have stoked the good, which we're all aware of. There's activism, there's education, there is democratization of storytelling. On the other, it is a place for information with no regulation, and I don't mean just regulation by the state, but also self-regulation, raising questions on trust, biases, and of course the not so good, which we're all kind of seeing on a day-to-day basis. So our discussion today isn't just about the platforms. It is about how they are being used and their potential to shape narratives for the good and the bad. And to help us unpack this, we have Lakshmi and Rekha, who are participants in shaping the landscape through their work with splainer.com and Her Story and Social Story. And if you haven't looked these platforms up, you absolutely must. So splainer.com, Her Story, and Social Story. So before we dive in, I'd like all of you to just reflect on this. Are the narratives we are seeing on these platforms creating bridges and or barriers? Are they enabling us to see the world more clearly, or are they clouding and blurring our vision and therefore our thought processes? And I hope at the end of this session, we have explored some nuances and perhaps leave all of you with some answers as well. So let's begin by having you, Lakshmi, give us a perspective on the topic from the lens of splainer.com and everything that you've done therein. And then Rekha, it will be good for you to share slices of your experience.
It's splainer.in actually. We can't afford .com, okay. Sadly. Look, did you see the exodus? The moment things are about news, things are about what's happening in the world around us, people just want to check out. It's easier to just focus on your work, doing well at work, your family, you know, all this interesting stuff that the ladies before were talking about, right? You want to talk about Ukraine, please, no. Gaza, no, right? Or farm policy, who wants to talk about that? And this is especially, I think, though, what it is doing is cutting us from the world. So we're sort of willfully choosing to be ignorant, and this particularly happens to women because women are so busy. So let me tell you a story. Actually, Splainer starts, and even before that, I had another startup called Broadsheet. It all started with a conversation with my friend who's actually head of Facebook India, Kritika Reddy. So we are hanging out, we're like old college mates, we're sitting in Bombay, and I'm talking to her and her husband, who, you know, I've known since college as well. And we're talking about politics, and Kirti had nothing to say, not one sentence, right? And then after they went, I said, what's wrong? I said, how come you don't have anything to say? It was a big story at the time. I forget what it was. She said, I don't read the news. She said, where am I going to read the news? I said, you're the head of Facebook India. She's like, no. She said, yes, exactly. I work all day. I come back. I have 2 kids. I have a husband. And maybe I can get to the gym. Maybe I can watch some Netflix. I do not want to get on Twitter or and sit there and hear people yelling at each other and shouting at each other, whether it's TV or Twitter or whatever. And that's when I realized that that's why so many incredibly smart, talented, professional women know nothing about the news, because it is so noisy, it is so negative, it is so overwhelming, there's no context. Why would you waste even 5 minutes of your busy time on that, right? But then it becomes like a big, it becomes a kind of handicap. So when you're in, you know, because men don't allow the lack of information from them having opinions on things. So, you know, just before the meeting starts, or at the water cooler, when the men are talking about something that's happened in the news, there you are standing on the side, just sort of nodding your head, hoping no one will realize that you kind of have no idea what they're talking about, right? And that actually happened to my friend Kriti. And that's what I tried to find a way for Splainer to do. It's like one thing once a day, very sane, very quiet. But it allows women, and now we have majority women readers, to be able to be well informed about the world without feeling overwhelmed, without feeling depressed, and without feeling angry, you know. And the only last thing I wanted to say is, like, I realized we weren't doing our job for women. I realized that we were dropping the ball as journalists, as media outlets, not doing that work for women.
So splainer.in.
Yes.
And Rekha, over to you.
Thank you, Nandita, for the introduction, and thank you, Lakshmi, for putting it so beautifully. So it's nice to be part of the Grace Hopper celebration, India celebration. I was here last in 2019, and it is sad to see that women are not part of this conversation on how new media is shaping a different narrative. You know, whether you like it or not, we are all influenced by news. We are all influenced by information on the internet. We cannot, in this age, we cannot afford to be apolitical. We cannot be oblivious of what's happening around us, because we are influenced by it in some way or the other. Whether you are doom scrolling through your Instagram, or you are consuming posts on Twitter, or you're just scrolling through something, there's some sort of news which is hitting you, and you're going to be influenced by it in some way or the other. Then why are you not part of this discourse is what it's a sad thing, that why are women not part of the discourse of news? When Lakshmi spoke about her friend, I remember way back in the early 90s when I was doing my 11th standard, was when war was beamed on the news, the Gulf War, and Christiane Amanpour was a big name in journalism. And it was the era of the Scud missile and the Patriot missile. I know you all are too young to remember that. I was in the 11th standard then, and I remember a classmate saying, "Who's Saddam Hussein? What is Scud missile?" Right. So, when we asked her that, don't you watch news? Because news was, the war was blaring out on television. So she said, ignorance, it's okay to be ignorant. But in today's age, we cannot say that it's okay to be ignorant. Whether there's good news or bad news out there, we're all influenced by it in some way or the other. So, coming to my work, I had Social Story and Her Story at Your Story Media at the intersection of gender and social impact, where we try to tell stories, narrate stories of impact of women in the workforce, women from every walk of life. Like I was just speaking to Nandita a while ago, there are extraordinary stories out there. They may not be big names. They may not be names who will sit on this dais and speak about what they have done. Regardless of that, their stories are worthy of mention. Their stories are worthy of celebration. So this is what we believe in.
And since we started with highlighting the importance of women in particular, keeping abreast of what is news, I want to kind of touch upon journalism, because at the core of journalism is news. And it may sound cliched, but journalism is dead, and long live journalism. In the context of big tech companies, social media, search engines, video platforms taking over the definition of media, what space does it hold today? What news hold in journalism? And a follow-up question is, news was sought after in an information scarce world, but today we're living in an information dense world. So where is the scope for news there? Lakshmi, do you want to start, or Rekha? Either one of you can take this.
So, like we were discussing, I come from an era where we got news off from the teleprinter. So when I was doing my mass comm, we had a teleprinter in our campus premises, and we used to just tear off the teleprinter pages, and we were taught to edit on that. So I have seen news evolve from there to typesetting, to the computer, to news manager, which is where all your agency news comes on the computer, to where it is now absolutely an explosion on the internet, right? So I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in the essence of news. Maybe news has evolved a lot. Like Nandita mentioned, we live in a very information-dense world. And to sift news from noise is very important. And that's where platforms like Explainer comes in, where they sift news from noise to a very, and sadly, it's to a very discerning audience. I don't know whether you'll agree with me. So it's the discerning audience, a well-read audience, an intelligent audience that consumes journalism kind of news these days.
Is there kind of an alienation happening, Lakshmi?
Yeah, so actually, I would not call it information dense. I would say that we live in a world of news pollution, right? Precisely because, I'm sorry, it is the fault of technology. It is technology that's destroyed information, right? Because algorithms now are the true editors. They decide what people will see or not see. If Zuckerberg decides you're not going to see news on, on Reels or on Instagram or Facebook, you won't. It's his party. He decides what you're going to see, not see, right? He can decide that what you're going to see is, a lot of right-wing stuff or vaccine denialism or very left-wing stuff. It's sort of, the algorithm determines everything. I was a co-founder of First Post, and we lived and died by the Google Newsbot. We had to please the Google Newsbot. The Google Newsbot was the real editor. Because without the Google Newsbot liking what we had and ranking it high, we wouldn't get traffic. If we didn't get traffic, we wouldn't get ads. If we didn't have ads, we didn't get revenue, right? So who's in charge? Google. And that's what's happened. Because of that, everyone now is just trying to game the algorithm. And that's why you can't find information that's actually useful. You're only looking at information by people who have either bought or given money to the company that controls the algorithm, or they've learned how to game it. Like SEO is a great example of that. So which is why you have news pollution, because people are not getting what they actually want. In fact, there's so much information, they can't find information that's actually relevant. They can't find information that's valuable. So it's actually become harder to be well informed in an information overload kind of situation. And there's no way for you to sift through. I mean, in the end, that's what I call splainer. I say we are the rag pickers of the internet. We go into the trash pile and we take what is valuable and we bring it back and we, recycle it and make it very beautiful and serve it up to you every day. Right? Someone has to go into the garbage, and that's what we do. Right?
So Google is the editor. So, and I'm sure that many of us sitting in this room also perhaps think of ourselves as content creators. I mean, that's the buzzword today. What are the boundaries between content creation and publishing? And is there one today? And how do you see yourselves? Each of your ventures, do you see yourselves as creators or do you see yourselves as publishers? Rika?
I'm old school still. So I see myself as a traditional publisher, but I know I have to adapt with this content creation world that we live in. So I think it can go hand in hand. But as a person who believes a lot in traditional publishing, I see content creation as a complement to the stories I tell. It complements the narrative. So if I am publishing a story on a story on a social change maker or an initiative that has made a huge impact, my focus first would be on telling the story in the digital medium. Of course, your story is in a digital medium, but I will complement it through social media channels. But my focus will not, focus first is not on social media channels. My focus first will be slightly longer form of journalism where it gives me the right platform to express what I need to say. Because I believe new media is very condensed when it comes to storytelling.
Explain that.
Condensed.
It's one thing, there's so much out there.
Yeah. How do you encapsulate a story in 60 seconds? I find it difficult. And I'm not dissing those who do that. And a lot of them are really doing good work. But personally, for me, I need to tell the story in the format I believe will make a bigger impact. And then complement it with other forms of media.
So we had an interesting conversation yesterday, Lakshmi, and you brought out this fact about, influencers or media people, journalists who moved on to now becoming influencers and content creators, have to don a persona. And I think what I took away was the fact that you said that you're always taught in journalism to keep your voice behind the story and the facts. Could you please tell us more about that?
So I think, today people don't trust sources. They don't trust the New York Times, or they don't trust, Indian Express or even News Minute. They trust people, right? So you might trust Faye D'Souza. You might trust Ravish. You might trust, Joe Rogan, right? So you trust people, and then they talk about what's in the news and what's happening in the world in this conversational way. They claim to have done the research, or at least have teams that research this information, and then they're sharing that information with you as almost kind of your friend, right? And I think this is how most of us now are comfortable getting our information. So it's not about length, actually. greatly disagree because Joe Rogan can sit there and talk for 3 hours. And doesn't matter. They will listen to every minute. So it's not attention span, it is formatting, right? It's the person. If you like the person, I'm sure if I asked anybody here, if you like the person, you listen to them, right? That's it. You want to like the person, you want to trust the person, you don't. But journalists are taught, no, you can't be that person. Your everything that you're taught is like when you report on something, it shouldn't be about you. It should be about the story, right? And it feels like a violation. The only people, like I made the point, who seem to have made the transition are TV anchors, because TV anchors were always influencers, right? And they were always, their job was to be charming and to, create a relationship with the audience, to be celebrities. So which is why I feel like, the Ravish Kumars and the Faye D'Souza's have done so much better. But if you ask someone who's in print to go and become, it's very difficult. So like for me, I'm much more of a text person, and I'm really struggling on video because, yes, I feel like I have to put on this persona, right? I have to be very lively, and I have to sort of figure out how I'm going to be on camera. And I'm not used to having that public persona, right? I mean, right now I'm not even thinking about what's coming into my head. I'm like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, but it doesn't work. That's not how you build a brand. That's the other thing. You have to become a brand. That means a brand has a certain sense of humor. A brand is very consistent in kind of positions and points of view. The way you present yourself, it could be even be clothes that you wear. So I think that is the hard part. People want a sort of, what do you call, a parasocial relationship with their news, person who gives them the news. And it's very difficult for most journalists to be that person. And you don't necessarily have the two skill sets in one person, right?
And then you talk about regulating, because regulation from a brand perspective, building your own persona, and that's kind of a certain kind of regulation. But what about, the kind of regulation we talk about from the state, for example? It's a tricky path, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and all of that. And also, are we able to, it's such an open field today, such an open field where, I always say it's like move from the power of the pen to the power of the keyboard and the fingers, and all of us are equipped with that. So in that context, can we really create lines between constructive narratives and those perpetuating harmful narratives? And I mean, who even decides that?
Well, I think this slide into absolute relativism, where every perspective is equally valuable or equally valid, is very much, I think, it's not about just news. It's about the world we live in now. We can't agree on facts anymore, right? There was a time when whether you were right wing or left wing, it didn't really matter, but at least you could agree there was a certain amount of poverty in the world, or you could agree, the sun rises from the east, or whatever it is. These days, first of all, you can't even agree on the facts. Like, whether the COVID vaccine is going to kill you or is it going to help you, even that you can't, right? I think the pandemic made it really, really clear, how we can't even agree on facts anymore. And the second thing is, I think we have this very relativistic idea of you're entitled to your belief. It doesn't matter whether that belief is kind of crazy or that belief is kind of fairly, rational. That everything must be treated equally, right? And I think the biggest sufferers, victims of this, are women, right? And can I just say, because, for example, if you look at what's happening in America, you have this big rise of the trad wife. I don't know, you must have seen her all over Insta. She is in a farm and she's beloing the roti. She has 6 kids and she's and looking perfect, of course, right? And she's my choice, right? Who are you to judge? But that's okay if you had a world where women could be CEOs just as easily as men, if women could like choose to be mothers and have very ambitious careers as men, parents, like men can be parents and have, high-powered careers. If it would be fine if women had the same set of choices as men, but women don't. So in that relativism has now seeped into everything, right? Who am I to say what Joe Rogan believes is more right than what is in the New York Times? Who am I to say? Right?
And I think the situation, or the problem compounds because of this whole algorithmic curation as well, because once you've consumed by chance, then that's what you're constantly getting fed. But I think we're in some of you here, I'm assuming, are, women in technology. And so what is the collective responsibility, Rekha and Lakshmi, that we all have? Me as perhaps a content creator, I mean, how does any of my message land with my set of people? What is the responsibility that women in technology who are working some of these big tech companies, etc., what is the kind of role that they may play in eliminating some of the biases that are so obviously creeping or existing in some of the new age technology? And also from a publishing perspective, the choice that you make of what stories to tell, right? So what, if you can just throw light on the individual and then the collective responsibility of everyone.
What one would say is be real. But what is real for me may not be real for you, right? What is cringe for me? Like one of my colleagues wanted to do a story on cringe content, which was which was a good enough story. But then there were differing opinions. What is cringe for you may not be cringe for the other. So it is very tricky, Nandita. How do you convey or how do you publish news in a very noisy environment like the internet? So it's blurred. The lines are actually blurred. For us as old school journalists, and I'm sorry to repeat this again and again, you look at sources, you verify the sources, you ask for, I'm sure you'll also agree with me, you'll ask for differing points of view before you write a story, It will not be that, oh, I heard this, so I'm just telling you this, which could be a 90-second reel. But for us, when you're writing a story, you have various sources. You go cross-check, verify those sources. You give different points of view to that story, and then you publish it, which I don't think in the long run may be what journalism is about.
Do you agree, Lakshmi?
I think it is hard for me to be. It's hard for me in a situation where you see news outlets basically behave worse than influencers. I mean, the kind of garbage they put in, on their outlets, and the stuff that they, you have product placement, you have, people who will, say something because people in power want them to say it. There's a lot of that goes on. So, I mean, I wouldn't say journalism is any less compromised in its own way. And the same way I would flip it and say there are news influencers who are genuinely trying to do a good job, genuinely trying to learn and do the research. I was giving you that example of that guy who did on this Kannada actor some murder story, right? I mean, he done fantastic. He should be in a newsroom. I was like, wow. So I don't think it's black and white, but I do think that sense of responsibility, the differentiator is not whether you're a journalist or you're an influencer or whether you're in a news outlet or just sitting on YouTube. I think, do you feel a sense of responsibility for your audience? Do I feel responsible towards you and say I want you to understand what's going on. So let's start there. Which means I have to put it in words without dumbing it down that you can understand, not patronize you, not make it stupid. Be like, okay, this person deserves to understand what's happening with, let's say, the smog in Delhi, right? What is the debate around it? What are the causes? Let me take all that jargon and put it simply, right? I also have a responsibility to consult different points of view, right? So that I don't leave out information about half the world from you. I don't withhold it. So my responsibility is always to the consumer, right? To the person who's consuming, whatever form they're consuming. Is like you have to be an ethical, you have to have that set of ethics that you have a responsibility. The responsibility is to that person. It is not to the world. It is to the person.
And when sometimes when we speak to editors, they all say, but that's what the consumer wants. Yes. I'm going to give what my reader wants.
My only worry here is, this is consumed only by a discerning audience. It's not everyone. And it's not across generations.
Okay, I don't know if that's true or not, and I think it's a sort of bit of a hypothetical. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying it's a bit of a hypothetical when people out there are living in a world where there's so much screaming, and now there's been screaming for now generations, right? It started with the news on TV, and now it's graduated to like all of the internet. There's so much yelling, there's so much misinformation, there's so much what. How much work does it take for you to be discerning? I can't even tell you how hard it is. I understood when I quit First Post, I am the goddamn co-founder of First Post. I am a journalist. I did not read news for 4 months. I was so happy I did not miss it. Right? I mean, it is so difficult to be well informed when you actually approach it as a consumer. If you stop being a journalist and you step outside and you see how hard it is, right? So I think people would be more discerning. So for example, there was a whole kind of stereotype ki, Hindi mein they only consume bakwas, right? Regional media is bakwas media because regional TV news used to be bakwas, right? It's the most sensationalist. Guess what? On YouTube, the influencers are doing fantastic, regional journalism. Fantastic. So I think people are hungry, but you have to give it in a way that they want it. I think journalists too much, we sit on our high horse and say, I want to do it this way because this is journalism, right? And I absolutely sympathize with that. Even I want to write 8,000 words stories. Like, I miss that, right? But I think there has to be room for us to figure out, like, how can we say equally authentic journalism, but in formats that are actually engaging. I feel like, in the end, isn't it called communication? What does it matter if you're communicating and the person A doesn't understand or isn't interested in understanding? Then you haven't communicated. You have like fully failed, right? Yeah. So I think the burden of communication lies on us, I think.
And I think the point you brought about regional media, frankly, I think there is so much of good storytelling happening in the regional media space as well. And I think a lot of the mainstream media pulling out stories from regional media because it's so hyper-localized. There's so many interesting stories coming out there. I think we're running out of time. One last question. If you were to think 5 years down the road with the people consuming the media getting younger and younger, how do you predict the evolution of narratives in shaping societal priorities over the next 5 to 10 decades? 5 to 10 years.
Stories will still be told. Maybe in formats even different than